Best of r/malicious compliance episode 84. Subscribe for edit videos daily. So, I work at a pizza place that partnered with a brewery to form one restaurant. You go to the bar in the front, order your beer and pizza, and then the ticket prints out in our kitchen, which is in the back. Also important to know is that I am a big guy, 6'3" easily, almost 300 pounds. So the bar and the pizza place have separate chains of command, but we do share tip jars and a drink supply. So when you get dehydrated from playing next to the 600-degree oven, you walk across the tap room and fill up your cup with ice and a soda, or water. Now, I like to be a nice guy and grab a tray, getting everyone else a drink when I go up. But I am also very thirsty sometimes, so I will often need 2-3 cups of water. The solution, of course, is to drink as I fill someone else's cup, then refill mine, basically minimizing the time I spend behind the bar and not making pizzas. Of course, the bar boss doesn't like that. He thinks I obstruct the way for way too long when I do chain drinks, so he complained to the kitchen supervisor, who, reluctantly, told me I could no longer stand behind the bar and reheat it when the bar was busy. This, of course, only applied to me. I told my supervisor the natural plan: if I couldn't drink behind the bar, I would have to make multiple trips. So, a week or two later, the situation came up. I was thirsty, the restaurant was busy, and the complying supervisor was behind the bar. I made about 3 trips, getting only water. Soda would cost the restaurant money, and pack unnecessary calories. Each time I would start drinking and walking as soon as the tap went off, then turn around when I finished my cup. This caused far more behind the bar disruption than filling a glass a few times. After all, the tap was far away from the entrance. The kitchen supervisor was perfectly happy with this. I did it a few more times that night. I made my point. I haven't done either since. Instead, filling up a cup with ice and drinking the off-tasting kitchen sink water. Fallout is important. Bar supervisor complained to kitchen big boss, who announced a plan to buy a water cooler for the kitchen. The kitchen supervisor joked that he reserved the right to put me in charge of filling it. Thank you. Next. This actually happened in 2006 in my sophomore year of high school. We had just gotten a new principal that year and he decided to completely change the dress code. One of the new rules was that any male who wore pants with belt loops absolutely had to be wearing a belt. It was nearing the end of the year and him and I had already had a few run-ins which turned into him looking for any reason to write me up. I'm not saying that I was an angel or anything, but most of it came from me not being intimidated by him and standing up for myself when I honestly hadn't done anything wrong. I overslept one morning and was in a rush, and when I got to school, I realized that the shorts I was wearing had belt loops and I'd forgotten to wear a belt. I didn't really care as the punishment for dress code violations was always a warning unless it was recurring, and I had never done this before. When we were changing classes, I passed by the principal in the hallway and noticed him looking at my beltless pants. I really didn't feel like dealing with him at the moment, so I slipped around the corner and into the swarm of other students before he could call me out. When I got to my next class, immediately the intercom came on. It was the principal making an announcement telling all teachers to check all boys' pants and send any boys breaking dress code to detention for the rest of the day. This really ticked me off because I had never broken dress code before. My pants were not sagging, and most importantly, I wouldn't be eligible to play in our tennis match after school if I got detention. Luckily my teacher wasn't in the classroom yet, but I knew that I wasn't getting out of it that easily. In a hasty decision, I ran to the teacher's desk, took her pair of scissors, and cut every belt loop of my pants, much to the amusement of my classmates. The teacher came in a minute later, completely missing the announcement, but sure enough, the principal sticks his head in the door about 10 minutes later after obviously noticing my absence and detention. He tried to play it off like he came to talk to the teacher about something and just so happens at that moment to notice my pants. With the smuggest look on his face, he said, "Dr. Octagonopus, did you wear a belt today?" "No sir." "Well, why aren't you in detention?" I stood up and revealed my newly tailored pants and said, "Because I don't have belt loops sir. Most of the class is losing it at this point and if looks could kill, I would be dead." There was nothing he could do though because no one would admit that I had just cut them and the rules clearly stated that it was only against dress code if your pants had loops. This was not the end of our run-ins but I at least won that round. Thank you. Next. A short and silly one. I'm from Germany and had English as my first foreign language. This story is from 7th grade, where you'd usually have 2 to 3 years of English practice, so the writing level they expect is not very high yet. We were doing a writing exercise and got told to write 5 sentences on a topic. I was already quite good at English, nearly fluent even, so I had no trouble writing longer sentences. I wrote 4 sentences on the topic and ran out of things to say, and had filled an entire page. I raised my hand and asked if I could hand in 4 sentences if they are really long. Teacher said no, you must write 5 sentences. I said alright. I thought about what to write for a bit, but couldn't come up with anything. So I just wrote at the bottom of the page, this is my 5th sentence. She did not find it funny, but she did count it, and I got a perfect score for it. Thank you. Next. Typing this on mobile, so sorry if there are mistakes in here, and English is not my first language. Another story here remembered me of this. I was in my first year of high school. 17 years ago, it was mandatory to learn English, French and German where I live. They start teaching you basic English at middle school. I was in a 2 low level / grade. We have a system with different levels of high school. A whole other story how I ended up there and I might share where I maliciously complied multiple other times. Anyways, so I was bored out of my mind already when we had our first English lesson. The teacher always started the lesson with an explanation part and a second part where we had to do our assignments. I had already done mine for the first day even before we started. Yeah, I was bored. The teacher would want to see my answers every time, then check them, be surprised they were all correct and then tell me to keep on working. About 2 weeks after starting there she tells me she wants to see me do the assignments, perhaps thinking I was cheating or something. I think she was a bit frustrated at the fact I was done within 15 minutes and then had nothing to do. I went to show her the work I had done, in front of her, when she told me there were always assignments to do, so I maliciously complied. Within a week I was done with all my first year assignments, with little to no mistakes made. Write words like home, cat and water, translate, I like dogs, etc. Too basic for what I already knew, so I finished the whole book and assignments and gave them to her. She was rather surprised but persistent. She gave me the books and assignments for year 2. Again a week passes. I take an afternoon to work through them and then have another lesson where I give her all assignments and the books back. She needed some time to look them through but concluded, yet again, I was done with them as well. She then gave me year 3. You can guess I maliciously complied to her opinion that there was more work to do. It took me 5 months to complete all assignments and books for year 1 to 4. I was a little slower with year 3 and 4 because I got bored. Again, I did some in class to show her I did it all by myself. When I gave her the last assignments and I was done with the 4th year book, she concluded I had really literally done everything I could. A little exhausted by my malicious compliance, the year's worth of assignments to look through and persistence, she agreed there was nothing more to do but ask for books from higher levels to do. She took it really well eventually and was kind of happy towards me when she told me she hadn't seen this before. She wanted to ask for better books for me. She genuinely liked that I wasn't just bluffing but really just knew more than the basics they were asking and she wanted to give me a challenge. Sadly school never complied saying the books were too expensive and it wasn't worth it. She told me rather disappointed that they didn't want the hassle. She gave me the option to do whatever I wanted for the rest of the year, reading English books etc. I would still have to attend and do the exams but she no longer required me to do assignments as I had quite literally finished everything there was to do. Thank you. Next. On mobile, so apologies for formatting. A few years ago I worked at a kiosk in a local shopping center, mall for Americans. Don't mean for that to sound snarky. Some people just don't know that applied a phone protector to phones. These protectors were absolute garbage for the price they were asking. If I recall, the iPhone 10 came out the Christmas before I started and it was £150 to get it applied, so I wasn't all that keen about aggressively pushing the product. My supervisor, who was a friend of a friend, we'll call him Alex, was tasked to write up a work rota every Monday for the next week. This is important because I had asked Alex if I could have 4 days off but make up for them later, as I was planning to go on holiday and propose to my fiancée, to which he spoke with everyone else to make sure they were okay working more days in a row if it meant that they got more days off, as I caught up on my hours. One important note is that Alex would have to send the rota to the owner of the company, we'll call him Randy, for verification and an hour check, as legally we weren't allowed to work over a certain amount of hours. So Randy accepts the hours and the fact that I have days off but make up for them right after I get back, which I did agree to, but it was absolute hell because I was working from 9-5, doing double shift to make up the hours I had lost in high temperatures, heat guns on full blast, a black hoodie, as it was part of uniform, and nothing to drink or eat because it was against the rules to eat or drink at the kiosk. Looking back on it, I wasn't even allowed to have lunch during that week. Along comes the weekend and all of my fiancé and his close friends want to go out drinking to celebrate the engagement, and considering the hellish week of work I had, I was down. It gets to about 3 AM and I've been drinking heavily since around 7 PM and I receive a phone call from Randy demanding that I work the next day, which means I would have worked more hours than I was legally allowed to do, which wasn't even on the rota. I explained to Randy that I'm extremely drunk and in no fit state to be going into work. There had been times someone had come into work after smoking a bit of weed, but this was an entire new realm. Randy then tells me he doesn't care how drunk I am and if I keep drinking, he just wants me at the kiosk at 9 AM. I continued drinking throughout the night because I wasn't in the right mindset to be making smart decisions, but I remember clearly that Randy wants me at the kiosk for 9 AM. I get to the kiosk at 9 and Alex is already there with everything set up and can see that I'm clearly drunk and sits me down while he calls Randy asking why I'm telling Alex that I'm meant to be there at 9 AM, which I just kept muttering. Randy is furious that I turned up for work drunk and basically demands that I'm fired immediately, which Alex refuses to do, because I hadn't done anything wrong. Next day, I was rotated in for it. I walk up to the kiosk and Randy is there and fires me on the spot for yesterday, which he actually wasn't allowed to do because all I had done was fulfill his request. I ended up with a huge payoff because, as it turns out, you cannot fire someone for following orders, provided you haven't broke the law. Thank you. Next. I am going to have to be a little vague on some details to protect myself here, so I can't discuss the type of business etc, so it's going to be a struggle. This is a lot of background to explain the kind of situation that developed over a decade. A place that was once truly fun to work at and easy to earn a bit of extra overtime became a dog-eat-dog struggle to survive. The low-level punes like me were split between those who felt disenfranchised and hated by the management, those that were basically looking for an escape route, and that group of snakes who would smile to your face and act sympathetic to your situation before sneaking away to inform the managers of anything they had learned which might have value. We were in a specific area of the business that was isolated and slowly being replaced by technology, so from over 1,000 in our building it dropped to just around 250 when I left. Most of this was done through voluntary redundancy, but the managers were given incentive to fire as many as possible to save money on VR. And since manager jobs were also slowly being cut, they were desperate to fire as many as possible, but most were incapable of following procedure. Mike was that intelligent and brutal kind of manager who, like the others, had been promoted into the position, but knowing he wouldn't get trained officially, took it upon himself to become competent. The man had gotten dozens of people fired directly and more indirectly by helping less competent managers follow the correct procedure. A certain quantity of work at a certain level of quality was required, which everyone met. Yet they had a bottom and top 10 list, and if you were on the bottom 10 list your job was on the line regardless if you met the basic requirements. Since there was always a bottom 10 by definition, there were always 10 people on the firing line. This might be vague, but it has to be. Mike's team was a sort of clearinghouse for the bottom 10. We were shifted between shifts and teams for various reasons, but what I quickly learned is that somehow the shift's bottom 10 were all on Mike's team. Now my performance was consistently in the top 10, so I was safe on that count, but my attendance was low due to health issues and my attitude was really bad. I also learned that the rest of the team was made up of people who weren't low in performance but had low attendance and attitude problems just like me, and we had all been on the chopping block by managers who failed to follow procedure. In short, Mike was the executioner of the workforce. The most vulnerable to being fired was shifted around to his team so he could succeed where the others had failed. Sooner or later my time came. My health caused a series of absences while I had hospitalizations and Mike pounced into action. In the space of a year he made 7 attempts to fire me, and each time I involved HR, who stepped in and protected me. I approached HR to make a case that what was happening was wrong, not just to me but to everyone. I made the case that the situation of Mike being the executioner created a hostile work environment, and the fact that I had gotten his attempts to fire me thrown out proved that he was not only hostile but was actively toxic. That it was against the law to discriminate on age/disability, and a myriad of other arguments. I was told that there was nothing they could do. Mike was untouchable and had the full support of the upper management in our building because he was saving a lot of money in voluntary redundancy payouts by firing the vulnerable. Legally there might be a case, but it would have to go through a court system and not through HR unless I had an example of him being hostile and abusive. The person I spoke to was very sympathetic, and he suggested I look into some things related to job opportunities that were coming up. He mentioned that many of them were managerial positions because a new type of roaming manager had been introduced. These were very needed and weren't getting much interest. Think substitute teacher, where a manager gets sent all around the country at the drop of a hat. It didn't occur to me instantly, but weeks later as I sat at work listening to Mike talk about his family, it clicked into place and my plan began to take form. Instead of making a complaint, I gave a glowing review and had several others do the same. If we couldn't get the man fired for his actions, we could get him promoted into a job that he couldn't take. The managers in our area were not even being considered for transfers because they lacked the training and qualifications to be managers anywhere else. Our reviews might just push him over the line into getting a promotion. And since roaming managers were being thought, the two should dovetail nicely. We didn't give the reviews to our management but directly higher up the food chain, way above anyone that ever dealt with our area of the business. Each of us mentioned that Mike had done an amazing job at sorting out problems etc., had great managerial skills and an in-depth knowledge of procedure. Then we sat back and waited. A few months went by with nothing happening and I thought the attempts had failed, but then we came into Mike losing his mind. He was shouting at the shift manager, his boss, about how he wasn't being given a choice. Turns out the higher management had gotten our reviews, looked into his record and decided he was a perfect fit for the roaming manager position, and since they were in the process of getting rid of managers in our area, they insisted that Mike be pushed into it. Mike had of course tried to refuse the promotion as was his right, but the higher management had made it a choice of accept the promotion or be demoted back to Pune. Mike had a family and couldn't just uproot them whenever the company needed him elsewhere, and a demotion with a pay cut back into the workforce of people who despised him and that were slowly being culled was just as bad. So he asked for voluntary redundancy instead, and was accepted. His last day he went berserk, shouting and swearing about how badly the company had treated him after all he had done. I was unfortunately absent for it but got a play-by-play and loved every second of it. Since I was told explicitly that I couldn't get him punished or fired, I got him a promotion he couldn't accept instead. Thank you. Next. The coronavirus is spreading and the province I live in is on lockdown. The advice from the government is to work from home and stay at home with even the smallest symptoms, like a cough or a sneeze. Yesterday at work we got an email telling us that our company will not be letting us work from home. So I maliciously complied and called in sick today. I have a very little cough and sometimes a sneeze. Not something I would call in sick forever. Europe here, when workers call in sick, the employer bears the cost. We don't have the concept of sick days here. You still get your wage when you're sick, up to 2 years. TLDR. Company doesn't let me work from home, doesn't get any work at all out of me.